Welcome, everyone. I'm Vicki Strella, a member of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, Maryland. Trending Topics webinars we sponsor are to inform the public about important issues in support of our mission to empower voters and defend democracy. Our co-sponsor tonight, Montgomery History, is dedicated to making our past inclusive and relevant to all Montgomery County residents. Few topics have shaped this community more over the last 50 years than political participation in elections. Your donations and support of Montgomery History and the League help us provide high-quality webinars and other services at no charge to the public. To support our organizations or to join, visit our websites. The links are in the chat. Tonight's program will examine the historically low voter participation in the county's primary elections and what can be done and what is being done to reverse this trend. Before we begin, there are a few reminders. The session is presented for educational purposes. The views expressed are those of the speakers. The webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on both of our YouTube channels, the Leagues and Montgomery History, in short order. Please subscribe and follow us on social media. We've put those links in the chat box. The audience will be muted during the webinar. We will have a Q&A session after our speakers. If you'd like to submit a question, click on the Q&A at the bottom of the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Type your questions into the box and then hit send. Only the moderator will see the questions. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. The program is scheduled to end at 8 o'clock. Now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's co-moderator, Matt Gable, Montgomery History's Director of Programs. Matt.
Thank you, Vicki. Tonight's program will have three speakers, Sam Novey, Ralph Watkins, and Dr. Gilberto Zelaya. First, we'll hear from Sam Novey, Chief Strategist at the University of Maryland Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement. Sam will discuss how county and state citizens feel about different vote methods and the policy trade-offs and implications for election administration and future turnout. Sam?
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Really excited to be here. As Matt mentioned, I'm Sam Novey. I'm the Chief Strategist at the University of Maryland Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement. We're a part of the Political Science Department at University of Maryland, and our mission is to help mobilize the faculty at our university to use their knowledge to be supportive of things to strengthen democracy, both in Maryland and around the country. We want to use the convening power of our campus so that folks like the League and other partners around the state can use our facilities, use our brand to convene important conversations and strategy sessions about how to strengthen democracy, and then mobilize the talent of our students to go volunteer, take jobs, get involved in the work of election administration, in the work of groups like the League, in any kind of work strengthening democracy. So really excited to be here today. I also just want to share that one of the most powerful things for our center over the last couple of years has been working more deeply with all kinds of people in Montgomery County, between Allison McLaughlin, who used to work in the Montgomery County Board of Elections, who now leads our Election Resilience Lab. A number of other folks from Montgomery County government have come over to our center and co-created research with us in incredibly exciting and powerful ways. And so obviously we love to serve the whole state of Maryland. We don't like to play favorites with any county at the University of Maryland, even though, I'm secretary of the Baltimore City Board of Elections. So I'm always, Baltimore City all the way everywhere. But Montgomery County does incredible work, and we are just really excited for any chance to work with either, community groups or election officials or county government in Montgomery County. Okay, so I want to talk about three research projects we have going on that speak to some of the issues that are at the core of this conversation today. So the first project we call the Future of Maryland Elections, and that is about just some of the dramatic changes in how Marylanders vote since, basically over the last 20 years. So as of 2008, I'm looking at Montgomery County's data right now. Nearly 90% of Montgomery County voters voted on election day. No one voted in early voting because we didn't have early voting in 2008, and about 10% voted by mail. 20 fast forward to 2024, it's a third, a third, a third, right? Um, and and what's important about that is some people, thought that the pandemic would be just a blip, right? That we would, basically go back to whatever things were like before the pandemic, after the pandemic. But what we're seeing is that, first off, the drop in people choosing to vote on election day began far before the pandemic. So when you look at the drop in election day, the percent of voters using election day in Montgomery County, it goes from 90% to 60% between 2008 and 2016. And that's mostly about early voting replacing election day. So I think when we talk about the shift in vote method, it's important to place that shift before the pandemic. And then the second thing is that, some people thought that after the pandemic, the voter behavior would shift back to where it was in 2018, 2016. And that's not what we saw. We saw about half of the growth in mail voting go back to either early voting or election day, but we saw a number of people continuing to vote by mail. And the reason that I think it's important to talk about this and talk about the trade-offs in this is that the operations behind running a vote by mail election, an early vote election, and um, an election day operation are all sort of different systems in the election office, right? And so having half as many people vote on election day does not mean you need half as many poll workers, right? It does not mean you need half as many polling stations, right? We have just as much infrastructure, right, to serve far fewer voters. And on the mail side of it, as you're seeing right now, the kind of issues we're seeing with the printer and so on, that would not be such a big deal if only 10% of people were voting by mail, right? But because we have so many more people voting by mail, we need much higher levels of attention to the mail-in process. And so it's great that we have more options for Maryland voters. I think that's something that a lot of folks in the league and others have advocated for, and that's I wouldn't take away any of those options from folks. But I do think it's important, when we add options, that costs money, right? It takes people, it takes materials, it takes bandwidth, right? And so if we want to make sure that we are running all the options for voting we have excellently, we need to either make sure we're resourcing that, or we need to say, where are ways that we can potentially reduce services in one place or another without reducing access for voters because behavior has changed. And there's no right answer to this, but we think that it's important that advocacy groups like the League and folks interested in strengthening democracy in Maryland begin having a more honest conversation about trade-offs. That if we just keep adding more and more options without, thinking about how that adds to, strain on the election office, we potentially are setting ourselves up for failure. So I want to share some good news about something we're seeing in public opinion, because we recently surveyed Maryland voters about how they feel about their voter experience. And one of the surprising pieces of good news for me, because being on an election board, I hear a lot from people who are upset about something that went wrong one place or another. When we go out on election day, we're going to the polling places where things are going wrong. But across the board, we are seeing that Marylanders consider their experience at voting by mail, voting early, and voting on election day. We see very high levels of satisfaction. Over 90% of Marylanders say that their experience was very acceptable or somewhat mostly acceptable, right? And so we're seeing very few people say that their experience was bad, and that's a good thing. And I think important to keep in mind, given that so many of the headlines in elections are about the places where things went wrong, right? Nobody writes a headline like voting went smoothly today the elementary school, right? And so I think while we need to keep working, obviously, so that no polling place opens late, there's never a line anywhere. I think making sure that we never screw up with the printer, right? We need to make sure that we're also telling the story that it actually goes right the vast majority of the time, and it's just not in the news, and that is borne out by what we hear from Marylanders when we ask them about their own experience voting. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that we do see openness to trade-offs among voters. So we started asking people on our surveys in the state, how would you feel about um, basically moving to a vote center model on election day, right? Where you have a smaller number of locations, but you can go from anywhere in the county. And we're very clear in the question. This would mean losing your neighborhood polling site. Like, are you willing to lose your neighborhood polling site to get 50 election day locations in your county where you can vote from anywhere in the county? And we see over 60% support for that. And it's not what's notable about that is not just that it's so high, but that it's different from the support for going to all mail. So we see under 30% support for going to all mail elections. So Marylanders definitely want in-person voting options, but they are not sort of locked into the idea that it needs to be neighborhood, over 2,000 neighborhood precincts. The other thing we see is that it's really evenly distributed across both partisan lines and racial lines. So, I think there's an assumption that Republicans, really into election day voting. Maybe they wouldn't like vote centers, but we see that, really high support among Republicans. We also see the highest levels of support among Black voters, which is something we're digging into with a further survey because a lot of folks had, assumed that Black voters might be more sensitive to voting options being taken away based on for obvious reasons, and that is not what we see in the survey. In fact, we see even more openness among Black voters to a vote center option. So, so to close that up, there's no right answer to the trade-offs facing, the policy trade-offs facing Maryland policymakers around changing behavior among Maryland voters. But there's a real need to have this conversation, and the current track that we're on really puts extraordinary strain on both local and state election officials to basically run 3 elections simultaneously every single time, for early vote, for election day, and for mail. And we need to make sure that we're either resourcing that or reallocating resources to make some of those options less costly and bandwidth intensive. Last thing I want to talk about, and this is something I call the Dr. Z effect. So we have been working at our center to understand the youngest voters, the newest voters, right? So how are we serving people right when they turn 18? I won't go too deep in this, but we were also very engaged in learning more about lowering the voting age to 16, which Montgomery County has been very active in as well. But this line of research is about, when people turn 18, are they getting registered, and what's driving, variations and gaps between different, 18-year-olds in different places. And the most important upshot of this research is that the most important predictor of whether you are registered to vote as an eligible 18-year-old in the state of Maryland is whether you have a driver's license, right? So when you, here, I'll share my screen quickly here. So as you can see here, the regression line is really tight here, right? That the percent of 16 and 17-year-olds with a license really tracks the percentage who are pre-registered. And so our counties like Baltimore City and Prince George's that have lower rates of license holding among 16, 17-year-olds, they are getting a lower level of service from our election system, and that's something that we need to address. But not all, and that's the same both for pre-registration and for 18-year-old registration. But I did want to share, this is what I call the Dr. Z effect. So Montgomery County is really far above the regression line. So we would expect Montgomery County to have about a 62% 18-year-old license, and a 16-year-old registration rate based on the number of 18-year-olds with a license. But Montgomery County's 18-year-old registration rate is well over 70%. And so we don't, we can't without doubt draw a causal link to the future voter program, but we think that is a part of that. And so I think as we are looking to move forward, around engaging younger voters, it's important that we look at all the options to serve this population better. One of them is improving our automatic voter registration system and broadening it so that it's more comprehensive and provides better service to people who are not getting driver's licenses. We also can look at just getting state and IDs and driver's licenses to every single 16 and 17-year-old in Maryland. We see other countries. In Germany, when you're 16, you get a state ID. They come to your school. It's free. And so I think there are international examples around ID holding that are powerful and drive both civic and economic inclusion. But then obviously we also need to continue doing voter education and things like Future Voter. So with that, excited to take questions later and hand it over, I think, to Ralph.
Thank you, Sam. Our next speaker is Ralph Watkins, who is the co-chair of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County's Making Democracy Work Committee, which manages voter services, products, and activities that reach more than 100,000 people in a typical election year. Ralph will address local trends and what the League is doing to promote and inform primary voter participation. Ralph?
Thank you, Matt. The local trend that I think is most relevant to primary election participation is the rising number of people who choose to be unaffiliated. They do not select a political party. In conversations with voters when we're doing voter registration, people say, well, I just want to vote for the best candidate. I don't want to be part of a party. And in Maryland, that makes a huge difference because we have closed primaries. You do not get to participate in the Democratic Party primary unless you are registered as a Democrat. You cannot participate in the Republican Party primary unless you are registered as a Republican. Fortunately, in Maryland, we make it really easy to change your voter registration up to 3 weeks before the primary. You can just go online and update your voter registration status and choose a party. The reason people are not doing that, I think, is they're not focused on, they're not aware that Maryland has closed primaries, for one thing. There are a number of states where you can walk in to the precinct on election day and say, I would like the ballot for the Democratic primary. And they hand you the Democratic ballot. Or I want the ballot for the Republican. And they hand you the Republican. So people moving here from other states may make that assumption. And the issue of closed primaries is a pretty small detail in election administration that might not be covered in your Government 101 class in a typical school. So that's one of the things we're doing a lot of education on, is letting people know in Maryland, you must select a party to participate in a primary. The other reason people don't participate, and this is relying on really old research the League of Women Voters did in probably almost 30 years ago now, interviews with people who were registered but did not vote. And the number one reason they cited for not voting was they didn't know who the candidates were, or they didn't know anything about the candidates. And why should you go to buy a product if you don't know anything about it? And that's the thing that the League focuses most of its energy on, is educating voters about where the candidates stand. In Montgomery County, we publish a voter's guide. We ask the candidates questions on issues that are relevant to the office that they're seeking. And then we publish their answers just as they give them. That ensure we are not endorsing or rating candidates at all. The candidates are speaking for themselves. We are trusting the voters to read through what candidates say and make their own judgments about who they want to vote for. The voter's guide is available in Montgomery County. We're very fortunate. The county government provides us a grant to publish it in Spanish. It covers a part of the cost of translating our voter's guide into Spanish. So we have it in both English and Spanish. We have a lot of donors who have enabled us to keep up that publication. We have published this year approximately 70,000 copies in English. You can get them from the league office. You can get them from libraries and recreation centers all over the county. The Spanish edition is available in a lot of libraries. It was published last week in El Tiempo Latino. It will be published, I forget, this weekend or next weekend in Washington Hispanic. So we're trying to saturate the community with copies of that. It is also available on our website, the Montgomery County League of Women Voters website. And for anyone who strayed in from another county, we are proud to say that in Maryland, the League of Women Voters covers every office in every county in the entire state. So if you go to the LWVMD.org website, our state league's website, you can find a voter's guide for any of our counties throughout the entire state. We also have a website called Vote 411. It's just that's the whole website name, vote411.org. The advantage of the Vote 411 website is that you enter your address and it will display for you just the candidates who are going to appear on your ballot. There are a few people who are policy wonks, and I think those of us in the top row of this box here, the Zoom session, are the sort of people who know what congressional district, what legislative district, and what county council district they live in. Most people don't pay attention to that, and they have a hard time remembering which district. And if you're working with a paper voter's guide, you have to find the right district. With Vote 411, it's just displayed. The league has done some study on this. What's the effect of the voter's guide? Back in 2018, we did an exit poll of voters leaving the polling places. And we asked them what their sources of information were, how confident were they about their choices. We had selected 5 precincts where we delivered the voter's guide to every household with a registered voter in it. We found that in those precincts, voters were more likely to vote all the way down the ballot. We have a long ballot this year from governor all the way down to Board of Education. And we always see a tendency of people to drop off. The farther down they go on the ballot, the less likely they are to vote. The delivery of the voter's guide gave people the information they needed to make choices at the bottom of the ballot. And we think that that increased their confidence, because one of the things that we asked a set of questions about what were their main sources of information, and then also how confident were they had enough information to make a good selection. And for people who cited that the voter's guide was one of their primary sources of information, one of their top 3, they were much more confident than voters who said they relied on family members or friends. It's actually kind of amusing, because there were people who reported their main source of information was their family and friends, but they weren't very confident about the information they were getting. So that was sort of interesting tidbit from that. So the league is trying to attack one of the underlying causes of non-participation, and that is the lack of information about candidates. And we feel that we've measured, at least we're getting some success on that. Would love to repeat that experiment at some point and do it in a refined way. But that's the sort of thing the League is doing to address voter participation in political primaries. So thanks, and I will look forward to any questions we may have in the chat session.
Thank you, Ralph. Our last speaker is Dr. Gilberto Zelaya, who is the Montgomery County Board of Elections Community Engagement Public Information Officer. I believe I got that right. He will review board actions to educate voters on the importance of the primaries and outreach efforts in place to improve voter turnout. Dr. Z.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. And can you see that? Perfect. So first and foremost, thank you so much. The opportunity to engage the ever-expanding Montgomery County electorate is critical and important to our mission. Our goal is always to ensure that every single early voting center or election day polling place, that those doors open at 7 a.m. and they remain open until 8 or when the last voter in line has voted. Additionally, we ensure that those mail-in ballots are secured into 58 drop boxes. We're going to go high level of some of the things we do. It's not an inclusive list. It's just kind of a high level of what we've been doing at the Board of Elections. And also want to recognize a couple of my team members. I'm not going to call them out, but they're there listening to me, and it's a team effort all around. I've been afforded and blessed to work with outstanding civic-minded individuals at the office, but also the relationship with Sam and Ralph and everyone at the League, University of Maryland. We're all part of the same team. And regardless of your political affiliations, leanings, at the end of the day, we're all here to ensure that every individual's constitutional right to vote a secret ballot is respected. So one of the programs I started when I joined the Montgomery County Board of Elections in 2003, which we started in 2004, was the Future Vote Initiative. Unfortunately, it's the only program that brings in students as young as middle school in the entire nation. So for over 2 decades, we've been blessed to lean on our community and especially our youngest of voters before they're old enough to pre-register to vote at 16 and or vote at 18. We've received in 2016 and 2018 a recognition and award from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and in 2006 from NACO, National Association of Counties. And the part of Future Vote is really encompassing participatory democracy, participatory kind of the voting process and what it relates to civic participation. A lot of our students will get, obviously, such as everyone in our call, the 3 branches of government, et cetera, who's the first president, but really that visceral experience of being inside of a polling place. You are exposed to that once you become a voter, or if you are blessed enough when a loved one or a family member takes you to the poll when they're voting. And so that experience really doesn't occur and really depends on how civically minded is that household. So Future Vote came from that need to expose our youngest of participants, county residents, of the process. Since then, I've been lucky to engage and empower over 55,000 Montgomery County youths within 35,000 families. It's a very diverse community. One of the great things about the program is part of the training is half of the training we talk about voting in Maryland, mail-in, drop box, deadlines, voter responsibility, provisional balloting, early voting, the 14 centers, and election day, how to leverage technology, how to become a responsible voter, how to maintain your voter record, what are the different nuances, the nooks and crannies that you don't get from a voter registration application. In this image, you'll see a very diverse auditorium. For the primaries elections, we will usually recruit between 1,000 to 1,500, and for our presidential elections, up to 2,500 students and their families. And it is a prerequisite for the guardian to attend or the entire family to attend the training, because it's a learning experience not only for the current registered voters in Montgomery County, but for their children. So part of the program is that on Monday night, beyond the training, they assist in setting up a polling place on election day. How to put up the voting booths, where do the signs go? They create a very intricate, elaborate, with the blue painter's tape, entrances and exits, wait here. And so it's a great opportunity for the individuals to really encompass and build this polling place. And they see this kind of this cohort of a team that gets together, maybe strangers, maybe neighbors, on a particular evening to ensure that the next day on Tuesday, those doors open at 7. The students do not touch ballots or equipment at all. And so that way the election workers could focus on preparing the equipment and the check-in tables, the poll books, while the students do the other incidentals. Some of the tasks that they do, they'll collect and recycle the pens. They ensure there's no partisan literature left in the voting booths. They will indicate restrooms if they're serving as a greeter at the front door. They will run the privacy screen from the scanning unit back to the check-in table. Trust me, a middle school kid runs much quicker than we do as adults. And so they're excited to really participate in this. When individuals exit, you get the infamous "I voted" sticker. The students will distribute that. And a lot of times adults will say, well, how old are you? And they'll say, oh, I'm in middle school, I'm in 9th grade. And they'll say, how can I sign my child up in this program? And so then the students will encourage them to provide their email, and then we will contact them. So for the primary elections, we will continue recruiting for the general elections. And also we encourage individuals to serve as poll workers. And the students really ensure that the polling room is free of clutter and any partisan literature left. Full disclosure, that young man is my son, Sebastian. So he's a college student. He's going to work in the Canvas, but this is him in middle school. And then in the bottom, right before he left, he graduated, and he will serve as a poll worker for the coming election. So before COVID, I call pre-COVID Future Vote, we also brought in students to help us out, kind of organize some of the incidental items. So they would test the Cat5 cables. They would put them in by lengths from 5 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, 20. They would ensure that they were in operational order. And also those the cabling that will go to the voting equipment, they will rubber band them nicely so then the staff could prep the equipment. They looked at this entire conglomerate of like wires and cables, because most voters don't understand that the electorate is extremely manual. It's not sending a voter registration online. It's a very manual process, from prepping the equipment, the cabling, etc. So prior to COVID, we would bring in students when they had no school or during the weekend. They would help with some of the incidentals. We're going to start bringing back students. I think it's, after it's been a couple of years since COVID, and it's a great opportunity to inform and educate and expose the children about the manual aspect of prepping for an election day or early voting. And as Sam mentioned, we visit every single high school twice a year, early fall when they return, and depending on the particular primary election, right after winter break or around spring break. We've registered over 25,000 students. A lot of those students may not have a driver's license, learner's permit, or ID, and they will leverage the last 4 digits of their Social Security to register. And one of the reasons, too, is because within those 25,000, a lot of those students will serve as election workers. One of the requirements to serve as an election worker, a poll worker, or an election judge, all interchangeable, is you must be a registered Maryland voter, which means 16, live in Maryland, and have U.S. citizenship. So in order for a student to serve to earn community service hours or the stipend, they must be registered to vote. So it's kind of that carrot, right, dangling, where the student, in order for them to serve, they have to register to vote. Now, if you yourself have an interest in serving as an election worker, or you have a nephew, niece, or grandchild, you could text on your cell phone the word serve and your email to 77788, and the system will email all the information you need to initiate the process to become an election worker or a poll worker. So text the word serve and your email to 77788. And this is one of the numbers that we've noticed. Nationally, Montgomery County, since the 2020 presidential COVID elections, we have the youngest poll worker force in the nation. The average age of our poll workers since then will hover between 49 and 51, while nationally it'll hover between 63 and 65. If you look at the numbers from this last election, in the primary 2024, 8% of our poll workers were high school kids 16 and 17 years of age. And then the next cohort from 18 to 25, 14%. You will see a decline in the 18 to 25 because then the students have since graduated and the general election is early fall. So you have a lot of rising seniors, rising juniors that will participate as an election judge. But if you compare our numbers compared to the national levels, we have a very young poll worker force. And it's because of the interaction we have with the school system and through the Future Vote program. Now, one thing that we incorporated after the 2018 elections, not knowing that the 2020 elections were going to be a little bit special, we initiated a texting prompt. So if you text the word vote to 77788, you'll get the Maryland online voter registration link. If you want to check or update your voter registration, you will text the corresponding word, check or update. If you want to find your election day polling place, you text the word find to 77788. That texting prompt will be available after early voting through election day, which is June 23rd. If you want to request a mail-in ballot, you can text the letters VBM for vote by mail to 77788. And right now we have 58 ballot drop boxes distributed across the county. If you text the word box and your zip code, the system will give you the nearest ballot drop box and driving locations and post office locations to formulate a vote plan when you want to return your second issue replacement ballot. And during early voting, if you want to identify the nearest early voting center, you could text the letters EV plus your zip code to 77788, and it will give you the nearest early voting center, driving directions, and most importantly, wait times. That particular texting prompt is only available during early voting. All of the information is included in your sample ballot. And we got an award in 2020 by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission and also the National Association of Counties. Now, outreach. We are extremely aggressive. We do over 500 events between elections. We're extremely active. We're everywhere, whether it's a high school, a farmer's market, Montgomery College, middle school, today via Zoom. And we're adamant because someone's always turning 16, someone is becoming a naturalized citizen, and there's no reason why we can't meet them halfway. We have been recognized by every acronym known by the federal government, both state, local, and international. We received a 2005 award from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission and in 2007 by NACO. Additionally, this year, we translated the voter information guide or the portion of the sample ballot into Amharic, Chinese, English, French, Korean, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Those are available on our homepage at 777votes.org. We're very proud of this. We've always looked at trying to expand the information that we provide to our very diverse electorate. We have shared this information with our partners and nonprofits and faith-based organizations so they could distribute this freely. Now, this is interesting. We were talking about turnout with the primaries, and I was trying to go off of memory, so I hope this is in the correct chronological order. But when you look at the turnout, obviously it always fluctuates between 27 to 20%. But in between, there's been some expansion. So I joined the Board of Elections in 2003. In 2000, let me move this. In 2000 The gubernatorial election, the turnout was 27%. And in 2026, that's when no excuse absentee voting was instituted. Because prior to that, you needed a reason to vote by mail, aka absentee, whether it was professional or personal reasons. Now you don't need to provide a reason why you want to vote by mail. In 2008, early voting passed, and that's when early voting was instituted in 2010. We started with 5 centers from Friday to Thursday, from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., except Sundays. But even with the advent of early voting, the turnout was under 20%. Then in 2012, those EV centers, they modified the time because what happened was, as you know, on election day, the polls open at 7 a.m. And our early voting centers opened at 10, and we would have people in line at 6:30. And so voters were upset because like, why aren't you open? This is the time you open on election day. So we kind of modified to meet the electorate. The legislature passes the laws, full disclosure, we don't make the rules, we follow them. And so I wanted to share all the different nuances that added. I called Maryland the Cheesecake Factory of elections. We have a whole bunch of options, okay? And in 2012, we had 5 centers. They changed the time and they included Sunday, but the hours were from 12 to 6. In 2014, and that turnout was dismal. It was 14.8%. Dismal. And that was a presidential. And then in 2014, we expanded from 5 to 8 centers, but a county who was willing to pay to add an additional one through the council, then you could add that additional early voting site. So we went from 8, but to 9, and the times was still from 10 to 8, from Friday to Thursday, including Sunday with the same hours. Now, let me go next one. Now, 2016, the turnout for the primary was a little under 23%. We expanded from now 9 to 10 centers, 11 total, from Thursday to Thursday. We added that Thursday because before it was from Friday to Thursday. And the times were still the same, but for the general election, we would change the time from 8 to 8, not from 7, from 8 to 8. Then in 2018, the ballot question, same day voter registration passed. So then even if you missed the advanced voter registration deadline, you could still register to vote during early voting or on election day. So the franchise is becoming accessible. Also, during the 2020 presidential COVID election, it was very unique. So for the primary, there was a state of emergency. Governor Hogan, through the state of emergency, every single registered voter voted by mail. And that was kind of the introduction to a mechanism that was in existence since the Civil War. Every single voter got a mail-in ballot. We also instituted drop boxes, and I apologize, it wasn't 58 drop boxes then, it was less, because we added additional drop boxes in 2024. But then also the postage was paid. You had to pay for your postage as before. And then in the general election, we expanded to 11 early voting centers, also the hours, and we had 39 vote centers. There was a fear that there wasn't a lot of poll workers because of health disparities within our older electorate. And so the fear at the national level, there was this call to service. There were a lot of vacancies across the nations with poll workers. Luckily, through the Future Vote program, a lot of our future voters who went away to college, came back, or needed to move back with their parents because of the economy, they came back to serve. And we had a surplus of almost 600 poll workers. We were one of the few counties that had a surplus. And it was kind of embarrassing because we needed to turn people away because we didn't have 240 polling places. We had 39 vote centers plus the 11 early voting centers. So the vote centers work. And the turnout was 79%. So as Sam mentioned, there's some interest in vote centers, crossing my fingers. But nonetheless, it's a way to enhance and to strengthen the franchise. And then in 2024, that's when we expanded the drop box from 55 drop boxes to 58, and we incorporated the 3 Montgomery College campuses in Montgomery County. So it's interesting, from when I joined in 2003, there's been numerous expansion and opportunities to engage the electorate. Yet the percentage is pretty much the same where you had this anomaly of 40% during the 2020 presidential COVID election because every single voter got a mail-in ballot. Thank you so much for your attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Z. We're going to go straight to questions and answers. Again, you can use the Q&A button to send those questions. I know Sam has been in the chat, if you will, answering questions. Linda is going to go through those again, just in case anybody missed those. Again, we're going to try and get to as many of those as we can before the end of the program, which is scheduled to end at 8. I'm going to hand things over to Linda.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. So I have a question for you, Ralph, about the 411. Does vote411.org have information for voters in other states such as Virginia, DC, Pennsylvania? You're mute, Ralph.
Yes, Vote 411 is used by the League in the District of Columbia. In Virginia, it depends on whether you have a local league to provide coverage, same in Pennsylvania. It's a nationwide program, but whether or not it's available depends on whether we have a local league to do the work, to ask the candidates the questions. And we're just fortunate in Maryland that we have enough local leagues plus volunteers. We cover every county in the state.
Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Zelaya, I think this one would probably be for you. In addition to poll workers, there are greeters and partisan vote observers. Are teens eligible for those positions?
As long as they are a registered voter, they will go through the Maryland State Board of Elections. There's a certification training that must take place before they could serve as an observer. In my selfishness, it's a call to assistance as a poll worker and observer. It is part of the process, but individuals will serve an hour, 2 hours on behalf of a partisan group and the party, but they will have to go through the State Board of Elections. So they need to be a registered voter in the state of Maryland.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Sam, you've answered a few questions, but I want to make sure that the whole audience got to see some of these answers because they were quite interesting questions. So, one was from one of the participants. Are there trends regarding how many or percentage from each party that vote early or by mail? And do such trends ever show any impact on pronouncements of high-ranking federal officials?
Yeah, so definitely we saw major differences between the, redder counties in Maryland and the bluer counties in Maryland with higher levels of mail-in voting in the blue counties. But the big takeaway is that the mail-in voting was up everywhere, right? And the even the places with the lowest growth in mail-in voting still had higher mail-in voting in 2024 than the counties that were the highest. Like the new low was higher than the previous high, if that makes sense. And so even though there is a difference, after 2024 we saw this a third sort of dynamic basically playing out everywhere with some partisan variation. Now, obviously, there have been some intervening events since 2024 and pronouncements. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens, this year. I think what we're seeing is definitely that people, there's interest in in-person voting, but we're not seeing voters making a huge distinction between in-person voting at their neighborhood precinct on election day versus in-person voting at a vote center, either on election day or during early voting. But yeah, the world keeps turning and voters keep evolving, and we need to evolve our state election infrastructure and county election infrastructure as it goes.
Okay, great. There was also a part there about neighborhood pride, with regards to um, one of the participants being an election judge, and that voters often feel that their neighborhood has better voting than another, and they might feel disconnected if we went from a neighborhood voting center to a regional
Yeah,
voting
so there's
center.
definitely there are sort of side there are sort of there are civic benefits to neighborhood precincts, right? You're often greeting your neighbors there. We hire all these poll workers, which can include all, that's a 55,000 young people serving the polls. That service has an impact on those young people in addition to an impact um on those polling sites. That money we pay them is meaningful for a lot of people. And it also has civic information benefits that, particularly for people running for local office, it's really hard to get your name out there if you're running for county council or running, in DC, they've got these ANC districts that are tiny, and being able to campaign with voters at your election day, at election day precincts is actually a really important form of access, right, to campaigning. And so, I think we need to take those benefits seriously. And if we are moving in a direction where either people are not voting in that way anymore, or we're not able to support that infrastructure anymore, are there other options for still achieving those benefits through other types of investments from the government? And I don't have answers to that, but that's the kind of conversation we need to be having, which is like, what are the benefits and costs we have with the current system, and how are people behaving? How's the world changing? And how do we continue to achieve the benefits we need and deliver the sort of overall democratic experience we want to deliver in a changing world?
Dr. Zalea, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I think what's interesting too, especially with Future Vote, that neighborhood buy-in. Because if you look at our Future Vote students, they live in a particular neighborhood. They truly reflect not only the language needs, but the experience within a voting block. Those schools, the students will go through those feeder schools from elementary to middle to high schools. So when we visit to the high schools, like I picture, for example, go to Montgomery Blair, Amharic, Spanish, Korean. They truly reflect the community in which these students are trained, vetted election workers. They go through the same process as the adults. They have to be registered to vote. They must pass that online quiz. And also they must participate in one in-person training. What's interesting too is these students, this most like my children, and they touch the phones before they touch a toothbrush in the morning, right? So they're so connected. And so even I recall at one polling place we had a judge, and he was a senior judge, well experienced chief judge, and he pulled me to the side and he was like, Dr. Z, I have a concern. I was like, what's wrong? You know, he goes too fast. And I'm like, what are you talking about? The student, for every voter that I check in, he checks in like three or four. He must be doing something wrong. And I was like, and I was like, so I observe, I'm like, well, he's checking in the voter. They print the VAC card, they ask the specific questions to introduce, to find out, to check him in. And then they give him the voter authority card, and the voter is verifying and signing off. And they're moving them to the ballot table. You know, and so what do I say? Go slower? No, and there's 50 people in line. So it's one of those things where you have to manage, right? The fear of an experienced election worker who's been in the trenches and the changes from cards, alphabetized voter cards, all the way to a touchscreen. But at the same time, it's incredible to see that marriage between our seasoned poll worker chief judges and this young electorate, a group of students who are too young to vote, but they're old enough to register.
Great, thank you. There was another question that Sam, I think you answered. So I'm going to start with Dr. Zalea, and then Sam, you can add your piece in again. So there was a question here around that if the contractor, there was some misprinted mail-in ballots, what happens to votes that are cast that maybe were incorrectly printed?
Okay.
And yeah.
So I got my mail in because I go mail in because I don't know where I will be on any given day between early voting and election day. So I got my first issue ballot. I haven't opened it because I'm going to dispose of this one and I'm going to wait for my second issue ballot. That ballot will have replacement ballot on the exterior envelope and in the return envelope with additional instructions. Okay. And since we have our bipartisan teams picking up ballots, people are returning that first ballot, right? Because this occurred on the Friday, it was communicated to state voters. So if you mailed and returned your mail-in ballots, we're going to keep those separate. There's a specific barcode that's not going to be the same for that second issue. It's very specific to that first mailing and to the replacement mailing. So if we get that first mailing and that barcode has checked in, we're going to separate that. And we're going to keep that separate from the second issue ballot. So there's a checks and balances. It's just like when you deliver a package and when you return something on Amazon, once you take it to UPS, you get that credit back to your credit card. How do they do that? Because they scan that barcode. Similar technology, and that's how we're going to safeguard that a voter will not vote two mail-in ballots. They're going to be totally separate.
Okay, thanks. Sam, I think you're good, right? Or do you want to say anything on this? There's one more
I mean,
question I want to get in.
I just put the statement from the state about what will happen for
Okay.
people
Okay.
who
And then
don't,
there's a
who send
okay.
the first one back but don't send the second one back.
Okay. And then there's a question. Did the law change about using a cell phone in the polling place? Does anybody want to take that one?
There's a slight change. Cell phones can be used for, like, if you need it for translation services, that's acceptable. But keep in mind that it is really important to safeguard voters' privacy. So no matter what you're doing with a cell phone, you are not taking photos of other voters. You just, that should not happen. I don't need somebody snooping how I'm marking my ballot. But yes, for purposes to enable you to vote, any kind of translation function, that the law was changed, and that's going to be permitted.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. I think we've got time for one more question. Anyone can take this one. There's been a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots when they need to be postmarked to be assured of being counted. So,
Yeah, we're putting out the word on that one. We're very, very in the league. We're going to be really, really cautious. The process for postmarking of all mail has changed so that it will be postmarked at a central facility to make everything more efficient. So you have thousands of pieces of mail going through the machines. But that could mean that if I drop off my ballot today, which is election day, well before the polls close, it might not go through that postmarking machine until tomorrow or the next day, which means it's going to have a postmark after election day and it cannot be counted. We're advising people, as soon as early voting starts, don't use the post office. Take it to a ballot drop box. Montgomery County's got, I think we have more ballot drop boxes than we have post offices here in Montgomery County. They're really convenient. You can take it to your own early voting center. So yes, as soon as early voting starts, skip the post office, take it directly to a ballot drop box.
And also a selfish plug to our board of canvassers and our bipartisan teams. Don't hold on to them. If you know what you're going to do, send them back to us, because starting June 1st, we could start pre-canvassing mail-in ballots. What that means is, as we pre-canvass them, we prep them, we scan them in as received, we will introduce them into our board of canvassers. What happens is, on election night, when all polls in Maryland have closed, we will release any pre-canvass mail-in ballots. Then we will release the early voting turnout over the 8 days within the 14 centers. And then we will start releasing the election day polling place as they trickle into the office. So then we'll have a nice, hopefully, picture of the turnout. If in 2024 on election day, I think it was over 30,000 mail-in ballots were dropped into a Dropbox. That was painful. So you have them. There's plenty of time. Send them back. And to piggyback with Ralph, yes, we're telling our voters the week of early voting, if you're not using one of the 58 drop boxes, and you must use a post office, walk it in. Make believe it's like 1980, 1990. Remember, before the internet, it was the last day to submit your taxes. What did you do? You drove to the post office and you walked in and you had the clerk date stamp. Also, post offices normally close at 5. Okay, so if you show up at 6, it's going to be closed. And then, just as Ralph said, if you deposit into that slot, even though it's in the physical building, you're not guaranteed it's going to get a postmarked or franked the 23rd of June. So do your part. I put in the chat. If you text even right now with your cell, box plus your zip code to 77788, it will give you the nearest Dropbox location, address, and also the post office locator. If you drop off your mail-in ballot at the early voting center or an election day polling place, because they all don't have drop boxes, there's over 240 locations, get in line and give it to the check-in judge. They're going to have a yellow bag. It's a yellow bag to receive any mail-in ballots at an early voting center or a drop box or election day polling place that does not have a drop box. So you have options. You have options.
Great, great, wonderful. So I think there are comments saying thank you to the three of you, and I'm going to let Matt do that wrap up. And then there's also a question about when will there be access to this recording of this trending topic. So, Vicky, I don't know if you can answer that one, but I think that's really answered the meat of all our questions. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can access my video. Oh,
Are you okay there, Vicky?
I'm not sure what's happened with Vicky.
Yeah,
I
thank
can go
you.
ahead and close things up for us. I'm not sure what happened there, but again, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We've had a great program. Thank you especially to our panelists and for their insights into how primary elections are working here in the county and elections in general. So again, thank you for that, and we just want to say thank you to the League of Women Vote. On behalf of Montgomery History, I'd like to say thank you to the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County for partnering with us, and we look forward to doing this again in the future. So, Vicky, any final thoughts?
yeah. I just want to say a really important thing that the league is doing is saying, do a plan for voting. And a lot of our messages about how to do that and what steps you need to take and what deadlines there are. And it's not just we're not just singing to the choir, guys. We're like, if you're watching and you have family members, you have neighbors who maybe are confused or don't have access to the information, please share it with us, with them. Go online. We have lots of resources about how to make a plan to vote. So we're just so happy that people tuned in, and please help others to participate in voting. Thank you to everybody for participating, and good night.
Good night, everyone.